The Shadows of Hinterkaifeck, a real horror story. Chapter 1. Echoes of Isolation. Have you ever truly felt isolated? I'm not talking about being alone at home for a weekend or spending a quiet night without company. Real isolation, the kind that seeps deep into your bones, the kind that whispers to you in the dark where no one hears your calls, and your fear echoes endlessly into emptiness. That's the kind of isolation that surrounded the farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck. In the heart of Bavaria, Germany, far removed from bustling towns and busy roads, lay this remote and desolate place. Hinterkaifeck was a small farmstead, nestled within dense forests and sprawling fields, miles from the nearest neighbor. The year was 1922, a time when silence and darkness carried weight, and secrets could remain hidden indefinitely. The Gruber family had lived there for generations, tied to the land in ways that bound them not only by livelihood, but by blood and sweat. Andreas Gruber was the patriarch, a man hardened by life, with stern eyes and a weathered face, a visage shaped by decades of working the harsh land. His wife, Cecilia, stood as a quiet presence, sturdy but gentle, carrying a sadness in her eyes that she never fully voiced. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, lived with them alongside her two children. Victoria was a woman of grace, her beauty overshadowed by whispers and rumors about her past. Her daughter, little Cecilia, named after her grandmother, was shy, inquisitive, and haunted by a curiosity that often led her into trouble. Joseph, the youngest child, was merely a toddler, a fragile soul who knew nothing of the world's cruelty awaiting him. The maid who had served the family faithfully for years had abruptly left, driven away by a fear she could not explain, something she described as a haunting presence in the old farmhouse. Her departure left the Grubers scrambling for assistance, amplifying their solitude. The farm was encircled by a dense ring of trees, standing like sentinels, ever watchful. It was easy, perhaps inevitable, for paranoia to blossom in such a setting. And it did, slowly at first, then rapidly, like weeds overtaking a neglected garden. The Grubers found themselves increasingly aware of small, disturbing anomalies. It started subtly. Footsteps in the attic late at night, clearly audible yet impossible to trace. Andreas had ventured upstairs numerous times, armed with nothing but a lantern and grim determination, only to find emptiness staring back at him, mocking him with its silence. Then came the footprints. On a cold, crisp March morning, Andreas woke early to tend to the animals. Upon stepping outside, he froze, staring down in disbelief. Fresh footprints stretched from the edge of the woods toward the house, distinct and menacing. What terrified him most was the clarity of the trail, clear and crisp footprints leading directly to the house, but no tracks leading away. Someone had come, someone who had not left, or perhaps could not leave. He scanned the horizon, heart pounding in his chest, eyes searching desperately through the gray mist, finding nothing. Andreas quickly swept the footprints away, unwilling to frighten his family, but the dread was already spreading through his veins. As days passed, the strangeness grew. Tools vanished, only to appear days later in places they had never been stored. Food went missing from the pantry, yet no one confessed to late-night cravings. Whispered conversations were abruptly silenced when someone entered the room, each family member silently suspecting the others. Trust, fragile as ever, began to fray, unraveling under the strain of suspicion. Little Cecilia became withdrawn, frequently found staring blankly into empty corners, as though she saw something, or someone, that no one else could. When asked, she would merely shake her head and whisper softly, "It hides. It always hides." Victoria tried to dismiss her daughter's fears, assuring her it was just her imagination. But deep down, even Victoria felt the suffocating presence of an unseen watcher, eyes she could feel lingering upon her, even in the privacy of her own room. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, haunted by shadows that danced at the edge of her vision. One bitter night, Andreas discovered scratches on the farmhouse door. Deep grooves, etched with a violent desperation, as if something had tried to claw its way inside. His first thought had been animals, but a closer look revealed a disturbing truth. These marks were unmistakably human, made by fingernails desperately trying to tear through wood and safety. Fear escalated into obsession. Andreas became convinced someone was living hidden within their farm, watching them, stalking their movements from the shadows. He combed every inch of the property, the barn, the cellar, the attic, every corner where darkness lingered. Each fruitless search only amplified his paranoia, making sleep impossible. Meanwhile, Kazelia Senior began suffering from nightmares so vivid she woke screaming, clawing at the air, crying out that someone was trying to drag her into the darkness. Victoria begged her father to seek help from the nearby village, to invite neighbors to investigate, but Andreas was too proud, too stubborn to allow outsiders into their troubled world. The isolation that had been their refuge became their prison, an oppressive cage of fear and suspicion. Then came the noises beneath their feet. Soft, persistent whispers echoing through the walls, faint laughter floating up from hidden recesses below the house. Sounds of life, a life that did not belong to them, existing just beyond reach yet horrifyingly close. When neighbors stopped by, rare as that was, they noticed the Grubers growing pale, withdrawn, eyes sunken with exhaustion. Andreas brushed off their concerns, citing the harsh winter, but neighbors exchanged worried glances, sensing something deeply wrong lurking behind closed doors. 1 week before the horror fully unveiled itself, a strange visitor appeared on the farm's outskirts, a vagrant, eyes wild and clothes torn, mumbling incoherently about blood and shadows. Andreas chased him off violently, fearing that the man was the cause of their torment. But as the stranger vanished into the woods, he left behind words that resonated chillingly through the cold air. It's already inside. It has always been. Inside. In the days that followed, a heavy silence descended upon Hinterkaifeck, thick and stifling. Family conversations became sparse, eyes darting toward the shadows in corners, voices trembling at the slightest noise. Each family member felt trapped in a shared nightmare from which none could awaken. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, as snow softly blanketed the farm, something changed irreversibly. Andreas gathered the family around the fireplace, his gaze filled with quiet resolve. He insisted they all sleep close that night, within reach of each other. There was safety in numbers, he believed, but deep inside, he knew it was futile. As darkness consumed Hinterkaifeck, wrapping the farmstead in impenetrable shadows, a presence stirred silently, patiently, hidden just beyond their sight. The family drifted into uneasy sleep, unaware that the terror lurking in their isolation had finally chosen its moment. Outside, the forest was silent. No animals stirred, no wind blew, only an unnatural quiet blanketed the land. If anyone had listened carefully, perhaps they might have heard the soft scrape of metal against stone, or seen the gleam of eyes watching from the blackness. That night, Hinterkaifeck stood at the edge of an abyss, ready to be swallowed whole by the horrors about to be unleashed. The true terror was about to begin. Chapter 2. Whispers from the Dark. Isolation has a way of sharpening the senses, turning ordinary silence into a symphony of sinister whispers. At Hinterkaifeck, the family had grown all too familiar with these haunting melodies. Each night brought new horrors, new uncertainties, new echoes of something they couldn't name, couldn't see, but undoubtedly felt. In the early hours of April, 1922, long before dawn touched the horizon, Victoria startled awake. Her heart raced furiously in her chest, the remnants of a nightmare clawing at her consciousness. Yet, as she lay there in the darkness, she realized it wasn't the dream that woke her. It was a sound, a barely audible scratching just above her ceiling. She listened intently, breath shallow, as her eyes traced the cracks in the old wooden beams, waiting for the sound to repeat. There it was again. Scrape, scrape. Gathering her courage, she lit a candle, its fragile flame flickering weakly against the oppressive gloom. Victoria stepped carefully from her bed, the chill of the wooden floor biting her feet as she moved slowly toward the narrow staircase leading to the attic. "Father?" she called out hesitantly, voice barely a whisper. No response came, only the eerie silence that enveloped the house like a heavy shroud. Ascending cautiously, each step groaned beneath her weight, as if protesting against what lay above. As she reached the attic door, she paused, her fingers trembling as she pushed it open, revealing a dark, silent void beyond. The candlelight flickered nervously, casting grotesque shapes along the walls. The attic was empty, save for dusty furniture, old family heirlooms, and shadows that seemed to dance menacingly around her. But Victoria knew something was off. The air was thick, charged with tension, as though someone had just fled moments before. She strained her eyes, scanning every shadowy corner, every pile of clutter. Nothing, just emptiness staring mockingly back at her. Shaken, Victoria retreated to her room, heart pounding wildly. Sleep was impossible now. She sat awake, eyes fixed unblinkingly upon her door, ears straining for any indication of movement. The following day brought no relief. The family gathered for breakfast in tense silence, each member avoiding eye contact, each lost in their own secret fears. Little Casilia broke the oppressive quiet, her voice trembling, eyes wide with fear. "I heard it again last night. Someone singing softly, like a lullaby," she whispered. Andreas slammed his fist upon the table, his patience worn thin. "Enough!" he roared. "No more foolishness, there's no one here but us." But his words rang hollow, even to himself. For days, he had denied the presence stalking them, yet now he found his own bravado weakening beneath the weight of evidence he couldn't ignore. Determined, Andreas ventured once more outside, searching for any signs of an intruder. His eyes narrowed as he moved across the property, snow crunching beneath his feet. Every sound seemed amplified, every movement suspect. His breath formed clouds of vapor before him, briefly obscuring his view. Then, through a veil of mist, he saw it, a small hut near the forest edge, once abandoned, now bearing unmistakable signs of recent habitation. He approached slowly, heart hammering in his chest, fingers tightening around the wooden handle of a mattock he had carried from the barn. The door creaked open reluctantly under his hand. Inside, the hut was filled with an overpowering stench of rot. A makeshift bed in one corner, scraps of food strewn haphazardly on the dirt floor. Someone had been here recently. Someone living close. Far too close. Andreas felt his blood run, cold. Who could have been lurking so near, unseen? And worse, where were they now? Fear spurred Andreas back to the farmhouse, desperate to secure the doors and windows against whatever haunted them. He ordered Victoria to help him lock every entrance, barricade every weak point. They worked feverishly, driven by panic and urgency, until the house was sealed tighter than a fortress. Yet even as they secured their home, an uncomfortable realization nagged at them. What if the danger wasn't outside at all? What if it had already found its way inside? Night fell swiftly once more, darkness closing in relentlessly, refusing the family any peace. As the family gathered in the parlor, an unsettling quiet descended upon them. a quiet that amplified every creak, every groan of the house settling. Andreas paced anxiously, his expression hard, haunted by the enormity of his helplessness. "I've searched everywhere," he muttered. "There's nowhere else anyone could hide." Victoria, eyes weary, gently placed a hand on her father's shoulder, silently begging him to calm down. Little Cecilia watched, clutching her doll tightly, her young eyes filled with confusion and fear. Hours passed, the tension unyielding. Finally, exhausted and afraid, they retreated to their rooms, sleep their only refuge from the waking nightmare. But the whispers were waiting for them once again. As darkness deepened, a voice, low and guttural, resonated through the thin walls, barely distinguishable, yet unmistakably present. Words blended into a meaningless drone, impossible to decipher, yet impossible to ignore. It spoke softly, rhythmically, almost hypnotically, lulling them into a restless slumber filled with dreams of shadows that reached and grabbed, pulling them deeper into a darkness from which there was no escape. As dawn broke cold and pale, the family awoke shaken and exhausted, each convinced the whispers were not merely dreams. But the daylight brought a sense of false security, and life resumed its semblance of normality, though strained and fragile. Days blurred into one another. Uncertainty became routine, anxiety became a constant companion. Andreas, desperate to reclaim control, reached out to neighbors, seeking reassurance, subtly testing if anyone else had experienced similar disturbances. But his pride prevented him from openly admitting their torment, leaving his inquiries vague and ultimately fruitless. Then, a startling discovery shattered their fragile equilibrium once more. Victoria, washing clothes in the cellar, stumbled upon a loose stone in the wall, a stone she had never noticed before. Curiosity led her trembling hands to pry it loose, revealing a narrow opening. Inside, a small cavity held a dirty piece of fabric, stained darkly and smelling strongly of decay. As she reached deeper, she withdrew a rusted blade, coated in dried blood. The realization hit her like a blow. Someone had hidden a weapon here, concealed behind their own walls. Panic clawed at her throat as she replaced the stone hastily, fear gripping her so tightly she could scarcely breathe. As she ran from the cellar, Victoria's mind raced, frantic with horrifying questions. Whose blood stained that knife? How long had it rested unseen within their home? And worst of all, who had placed it there? That evening, gathered once more in oppressive silence, Victoria couldn't suppress her fears any longer. She confessed her discovery to Andreas, her voice trembling. He listened gravely, face ashen, unable to hide his own dread. "We cannot stay here," Victoria pleaded desperately. "We must leave." But Andreas, stubborn and resolute, shook his head, grimly. "This is our home. Whatever is happening, we must face it." His resolve, born from pride and fear of losing control, sealed their fate. And as the shadows lengthened and night descended once more, the whispers rose again, stronger now, almost mocking in their clarity. The family huddled together in terrified silence, eyes wide, hearts pounding with a dreadful certainty that the darkness around them was alive and waiting. What they did not know, could not know, was that something hidden deep within their home had already claimed it as its own. Watching, waiting, whispering from the darkness, patiently biding its time. For the nightmare of Hinterkaifeck had only just begun. Chapter 3. Night of Blood. Darkness has a way of hiding secrets. Secrets that wait silently, lurking in shadows, patiently biding their time until the moment to strike is perfect. For Hinterkaifeck, that moment had arrived. The evening of March 31st, 1922 was bitterly cold. Snow fell softly, blanketing the farmstead in silence. An unnatural stillness enveloped the land, as if nature itself sensed the horrors that awaited within the darkness. Andreas Gruber paced nervously, pausing occasionally to glance anxiously through the window, his breath fogging the chilled glass. Shadows danced across his weathered face, illuminated by the faint glow of lanterns. Victoria sat by the fireplace, rocking Joseph gently to sleep. Little Cecilia huddled close, her eyes heavy with exhaustion yet fearful to close completely, afraid of the whispers she might hear again. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, had arrived that very afternoon, unaware of the dark cloud hanging over the family. She moved cautiously around the unfamiliar house, her presence both a comfort and another unsettling change in the family's delicate routine. As the night pressed in, Andreas suddenly stiffened, his eyes darting toward the barn outside. "Did you hear that?" he whispered sharply. Victoria looked up, startled. "Hear what?" "Something in the barn," Andreas said tensely. "I heard movement." He rose swiftly, grabbing his coat and lantern. "I'll check it." "I'll go with you," Victoria insisted, her voice anxious. "No," Andreas replied firmly, grabbing his mattock by the door. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." She watched, heart pounding, as he vanished into the night, the glow of his lantern flickering until it disappeared into the darkness. Outside, Andreas walked swiftly, snow crunching beneath his boots, eyes scanning nervously. He pushed open the heavy barn doors, the creaking amplified by silence. Shadows loomed ominously inside. The air felt colder, denser. He stepped forward cautiously, lantern held high. Suddenly a sharp blow struck the back of his head. Pain exploded in his skull, dropping him instantly. He collapsed to the ground, vision blurring, blood soaking into the straw-covered floor. A shadow towered over him, raising the mattock once more. Andreas tried to scream, but no sound emerged. Another brutal strike silenced him forever. Inside the farmhouse, minutes stretched painfully into an eternity. Victoria paced, nerves fraying. "He's taking too long," she whispered. Maria watched anxiously, clutching the rosary around her neck. Little Cecilia clung tightly to her mother, eyes wide. Victoria couldn't bear the uncertainty. She gently handed Joseph to Maria, turning toward the door. "Stay here. Keep the children safe." Stepping out, she pulled her shawl tightly around her, shoulders heading toward the barn, unaware of the horror that awaited her. Inside the barn, she hesitated, eyes struggling to adjust. "Father?" she called weakly. The blow came without warning, a swift, violent strike. Victoria stumbled forward, dazed, feeling warmth cascade down her face. She turned just in time to see the mattock rise again, glistening ominously in the faint light. She raised her hand defensively, a futile attempt against the crushing force that followed. She fell beside her father, blood mingling silently upon the floor. In the farmhouse, Maria shifted nervously, sensing something terribly wrong. Little Cecilia began to sob quietly. "Mama," the child whispered. Maria hesitated, feeling panic rising. "Stay here," she said, her voice shaking. "I'll be right back." Maria opened the farmhouse door cautiously, peering into the darkness. The silence felt suffocating. She took tentative steps toward the barn, heart racing. Before she even reached the doorway, powerful hands seized her from behind. She barely had time to gasp before the mattock struck, ending her screams before they began. Little Cecilia waited anxiously, clutching Joseph tightly. Her small body shook uncontrollably as the minutes stretched endlessly. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks as she stared at the door, willing her mother to return. The farmhouse door creaked open slowly. A shadow filled the doorway. The child's heart leaped in relief until she saw clearly. This was not her mother. The figure approached silently, footsteps heavy and deliberate. Little Casilia shrank back, shielding her brother instinctively. But it was no use. Darkness had found them. The final screams echoed briefly before the farmhouse once again fell into sinister silence. Hours passed. The horror of that night lay concealed beneath the heavy snowfall. Dawn brought no relief, only a haunting stillness. The farm, now silent, betrayed no trace of the violence hidden behind its closed doors. Strangely, life continued at Hinterkaifeck. Smoke rose from the chimney, animals were tended, neighbors saw movement in the fields. Yet, the family made no appearances in town, leading the villagers to wonder aloud if something was wrong. Still, no one checked. Isolation protected secrets too dark for daylight. Days later, neighbors grew increasingly suspicious. Why hadn't anyone seen the Grubers? Why hadn't Victoria been to church? Finally, curiosity overcame caution, and a small group approached the farm. The scene they found defied comprehension. Inside the barn, bodies lay in grim repose. Andreas, Victoria, Maria, all brutally slain. Little Casilia lay near her mother, fingers clenched in fear, strands of her own hair clutched tightly in desperation, a tragic attempt to stay awake through her mortal injuries. Inside the farmhouse, the tiny, lifeless body of Joseph lay still, in his crib. The farmstead had become a tomb, filled with horrors unimaginable. But the terror deepened as villagers noticed the unsettling signs: food eaten recently, animals fed, fires freshly lit. The murderer had stayed, lingering in morbid comfort amidst the victims, inhabiting their home like a grotesque shadow. News spread rapidly, horror gripping the village. Police soon arrived, struggling to comprehend the brutality, the motive behind such savagery. Yet the case baffled them, defying explanation. Who could commit such an atrocity and then remain calmly among the dead? Speculations ran wild, personal grudges, supernatural vengeance, unknown drifters, but nothing fit perfectly. Investigators combed the scene meticulously, finding only confusion and unanswered questions. The murderer left no definitive clues, vanishing silently into obscurity, leaving behind only horror and uncertainty. In the following days, fear gripped the countryside. Doors remained locked, curtains tightly drawn. Villagers whispered anxiously, haunted by paranoia, distrust festering. Neighbors eyed one another with suspicion, fear driving wedges deep into once tight bonds. Hinterkaifeck became more than just a crime. It became a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires, each retelling amplifying its chilling mystery. The farmstead itself grew infamous, deserted, a relic of inexplicable violence. Yet as weeks turned into months, people began noticing something deeply disturbing. Lights flickered at night within the empty farmhouse. Strange figures moved through the shadows, footsteps echoed from within the deserted property, faint laughter drifting ominously through the woods. Hinterkaifeck was abandoned by the living, but not by whatever darkness lingered there, waiting, patiently, silently, eternally. And though investigators tried desperately to bury the truth alongside the bodies, the horrors of that night refused to rest. Rumors persisted. Ghostly sightings continued. Whispers grew louder, echoing warnings that Hinterkaifeck remained cursed, forever bound to the blood spilled beneath its roof. But the greatest terror remained unspoken, hidden beneath the layers of violence and mystery. The chilling truth that the murderer was never found, the nightmare never resolved, and perhaps somewhere beyond the shadows, the killer watched silently, knowing the secrets of that dreadful night, content to let the horror endure. For at Hinterkaifeck, the nightmare had no end. Chapter 4. The Unseen Guest. There's a strange comfort in believing danger always comes from outside, from somewhere far away, from strangers you can point out and keep at a distance. But what if the real horror, the truest terror, is discovering that danger was never outside at all, but quietly nestled within the walls you thought kept you safe? At Hinterkaifeck, this nightmare became chillingly real. After the massacre, a sinister calm settled over the farm. Blood had been spilled, bodies lay cold and still, yet the murderer remained. Calm, patient, hidden comfortably within the shadows. Days turned slowly. Outside, neighbors speculated nervously about the family's absence, yet no one approached immediately, uneasy to interfere in the family's privacy. Inside Hinterkaifeck, however, something deeply unsettling unfolded. The killer moved freely through the house. Each step methodical, each movement disturbingly calm. He lit fires, warming himself by the hearth as if he belonged there. He prepared meals in the family's kitchen, seated comfortably at their table, consuming their food. He cared for the livestock, milking the cows, feeding the pigs, even tending meticulously to the dog that had once barked at strangers, but now lay quiet, sensing perhaps that resistance was pointless. To anyone watching from afar, nothing seemed amiss. Smoke curled lazily from the farmhouse chimney each evening. Animals wandered the fields as usual. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, painfully ordinary. Yet within the farmhouse walls, the air hung thick with horror. In darkened rooms, the killer moved silently past furniture, past toys scattered on the floor, past portraits of the smiling family he had extinguished so violently. Nightfall brought a different, deeper darkness. With lantern extinguished, the killer settled into the shadows, embracing the stillness. Yet sleep came rarely. Instead, he would wander silently through rooms, still echoing faintly with the family's voices, hauntingly familiar sounds he had silenced forever. His fingertips traced gently along the walls, whispering softly, conversations with himself, answers murmured back by empty spaces. Stranger still was how methodically he lived among the dead. The bodies remained exactly where they had fallen, yet he showed no discomfort passing them daily. He moved around the lifeless forms of Andreas and Victoria without hesitation, stepping casually over the spots stained darkly with blood, as if they were merely furniture or objects to avoid carelessly. At night, the shadows seemed to stretch and shift, playing tricks even upon the killer himself. At times, he believed he heard whispers from the barn, faint sobbing from the empty bedrooms. Yet when he paused, listening intently, only silence answered. Cold, mocking silence. Neighbors occasionally glimpsed movement at the farm, shadows shifting behind curtains, lantern light flickering briefly in darkened windows. Yet none suspected the horrific truth. The death had claimed Hinterkaifeck days earlier, and the murderer had comfortably taken residence among his victims. One evening a visitor approached, a neighbor delivering mail. The killer froze, watching intently through a small crack in the curtains as the neighbor knocked, waited, and eventually left, shaking his head uneasily. Afterward, the murderer relaxed, smiling faintly to himself. He knew no one would intrude further, not yet. People preferred not to meddle. They'd rather whisper than confront darkness head-on. Days later, he ventured briefly into the village, hidden beneath a heavy coat and hat, blending effortlessly with the other villagers. He overheard the whispers, the family missing, rumors growing darker. He listened with concealed satisfaction, knowing he had become a specter, a shadow feared yet unseen. Returning to the farm, he found a strange sense of belonging in this twisted existence. He cleaned meticulously, almost compulsively, erasing traces of his presence while still maintaining order. But never did he touch the bodies, leaving them as they were, a silent audience to his macabre routine. At night, he often stood in silence, over Josef's crib, staring blankly at the tiny, lifeless form. What thoughts passed through his mind remained hidden, unknowable even to himself. Perhaps remorse touched him briefly, or perhaps he felt nothing at all, merely fascinated by the stillness that death bestowed upon a place so recently filled with life. The longer he remained, the more comfortable he became. The isolation soothed him, the shadows embraced him warmly. He began speaking aloud, addressing the family as if they still lived. Conversations filled the empty house. Answers whispered back from the creaking walls, soothing the gnawing emptiness within him. Neighbors began to feel an inexplicable dread when passing near the farm, a sense of eyes watching from the darkness, a cold breath upon their necks. Yet none dared approach. Compelled by instinct to stay away, Hinterkaifeck had become a place avoided at all costs, a forbidden ground marked by unseen terror. When finally a group of villagers gathered the courage to investigate the prolonged silence at the farm, the killer watched calmly from the shadows. As they approached, lanterns held nervously, voices trembling. He considered briefly confronting them, emerging suddenly to send them scattering, but chose instead to slip quietly out the back, vanishing unnoticed into the dense woods. He lingered, hidden among the trees, watching silently as the villagers entered and discovered the horrors inside. Their screams echoed through the cold air, their panic visible even from afar. He smiled grimly, satisfied. His work was complete. His legacy had been sealed. Yet even as the villagers reeled in horror, the killer didn't flee immediately. He stayed, close, hidden, observing quietly as police arrived, as neighbors crowded near, whispering wildly. He listened to their theories, fugitives, drifters, dark spirits, smiling faintly at their ignorance, their inability to grasp the reality that evil could come from within their own community. Days later, police and villagers left, abandoning Hinterkaifeck once again to silence. He remained a while longer, savoring the solitude, the strange comfort of the place he had claimed as his own. Finally, as the farmhouse fell into permanent darkness, he departed quietly, disappearing without a trace, leaving only shadows and unanswered questions behind. Hinterkaifeck stood empty once more. Yet, locals whispered anxiously of continued sightings, shapes moving behind windows, lights flickering mysteriously in the deserted farmhouse. Some swore they saw a figure pacing restlessly, forever bound to the scene of his crimes. In truth, no one ever discovered the identity of the unseen guest. He faded into legend, his existence reduced to ghost stories whispered around campfires. Yet the truth, far more terrifying, remained. The killer had never been a stranger. He had known the family, known their secrets, their fears, their isolation. And for a time, he had shared that isolation, living comfortably, unseen among his victims. Hinterkaifeck would forever remain haunted, not just by ghosts or shadows, but by the chilling realization that horror doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes, the darkest threats are those that live silently beside us, watching, waiting, forever unseen, forever near. Chapter 5. The First Discovery. There's a chilling moment when suspicion becomes certainty, when whispered fears crystallize into a reality too horrible to deny. For the villagers near Hinterkaifeck, that moment had finally arrived. Days after the brutal murders, an oppressive stillness lingered over the farmstead. The absence of the Gruber family began to gnaw at the edges of neighbors' minds, growing impossible to ignore. At first, excuses were made. Perhaps illness had confined them indoors, perhaps business had drawn them away. But these explanations rang hollow as silence stretched ominously from the isolated farm. Finally, on April 4th, curiosity overcame fear. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor and acquaintance of Andreas Gruber, could no longer suppress the anxiety. that consumed him. Alongside two others, he resolved to investigate the disturbing quiet at Hinterkaifeck. Approaching the property, they felt a tangible dread hanging heavily over them. Snow still blanketed the ground, creating an eerie silence. Broken only by the crunch of footsteps, Schlittenbauer hesitated briefly at the barn door, exchanging uncertain glances with the others. With trembling fingers, he pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, darkness greeted them, and for a moment, it seemed nothing was amiss. Then, their eyes adjusted, revealing shapes upon the floor, shapes that made their blood run cold. 4 bodies lay twisted grotesquely amid blood-soaked straw. Andreas, Victoria, Maria, and heartbreakingly, little Cecilia. Schlittenbauer stepped back sharply, horror choking his voice. His companions froze in silent disbelief, minds refusing to accept the brutality before them. Recovering slowly, Schlittenbauer moved closer, confirming the unimaginable. Andreas's lifeless eyes stared blankly upward, mouth frozen in a final, silent scream. Victoria lay beside him, her expression forever captured in terror, limbs arranged unnaturally. Maria's figure was sprawled nearby, face hidden beneath matted hair stained darkly. But the sight of young Cecilia was most devastating. Her tiny hands clenched desperately, tufts of her own hair pulled out in agony, evidence of a heartbreaking fight to stay alive. Staggering outside, Schlittenbauer gasped for breath, nausea threatening to overwhelm him. The other villagers exchanged panicked glances, dread paralyzing them momentarily. Gathering courage, they cautiously approached the farmhouse, fearing yet another grim discovery. The door creaked open with reluctance, as if trying to guard the secrets within. Inside, an oppressive silence hung heavily. The air felt thick, tainted with decay and despair. As they moved deeper into the house, their footsteps echoed hauntingly. Every room they passed felt unbearably empty, abandoned, yet disturbingly occupied. Furniture sat untouched, dishes stacked neatly, remnants of a life abruptly halted. The bedroom door stood ajar, revealing a scene forever etched into memory. Joseph, barely a toddler, lay lifeless in his crib. The villagers paused, breath catching in their throats, eyes filling with tears at the profound cruelty before them. Schlittenbauer's heart sank deeply, overwhelmed by a sense of personal anguish. Memories flooded him. Conversations with Andreas, moments shared with Victoria. The familiarity of the family sharpened the horror, deepening the wound. Yet as they stood immobilized, a chilling realization struck. Someone had recently tended the farm. Fires had been lit, animals fed, meals consumed. The murderer had remained, calmly inhabiting the house long after the family lay dead. The thought was incomprehensible, disturbing beyond words. Word spread rapidly through the village, igniting panic and paranoia. Neighbors rushed to Hinterkaifeck, each arrival amplifying the confusion, rumors spiraling wildly. Soon, authorities arrived, overwhelmed by the scale of brutality. Investigators examined every detail carefully, horrified yet determined. Each victim bore wounds inflicted brutally by a mattock, suggesting strength, rage, and intimate knowledge of the family. Yet no clear motive emerged, no evidence revealed the killer's identity. Suspicion spread like wildfire, igniting whispers and accusations. Lorenz Schlittenbauer himself fell briefly under suspicion, his close ties to Victoria raising uncomfortable questions. Yet his grief was genuine, his horror unmistakable, eventually clearing suspicion from him. Days stretched into weeks, investigators growing increasingly desperate. Trails led nowhere. Clues vanished inexplicably. Hinterkaifeck became a puzzle, unsolvable and maddening. Villagers locked doors fearfully, barricaded windows, whispers of mistrust poisoning friendships, eroding communal bonds. The farmstead itself became a grim curiosity, drawing visitors from surrounding villages. The curious wandered cautiously through rooms haunted by death, feeling a sinister presence lingering in dark corners. Many reported strange sensations, cold spots, faint whispers, shadows moving just beyond sight. Even skeptics felt unease within the house, driven quickly away by an unshakable dread. As the investigation faltered, villagers retreated into fearful silence. Hinterkaifeck stood empty, gradually reclaimed by nature, but its horror refused to fade. Stories persisted, strange noises echoing from within, mysterious lights flickering at night. Fear solidified into folklore, the farmstead becoming a place spoken of only in frightened whispers. Yet the lingering question haunted everyone. Who could commit such unspeakable violence, calmly remain among the dead, and vanish without trace? Investigators considered drifters, disgruntled neighbors, secret lovers, yet no theory perfectly explained the crime. Each possible solution raised further questions, deepening the mystery. Then came whispers of something even darker, supernatural. Explanations, suggestions of a malevolent spirit inhabiting Hinterkaifeck, driving the killer's hand. Villagers recalled Victoria's warnings of strange voices, Andreas's paranoia, little Cazilia's frightened pleas. Perhaps something ancient, something evil, had awakened there, infecting the murderer's mind. Such stories spread rapidly, embedding deeply into local lore. Hinterkaifeck transformed from tragedy into legend, its horror enduring, forever unresolved. Meanwhile, the village struggled to recover. Normalcy proved impossible, trust shattered beyond repair. Neighbors eyed one another warily, suspicion simmering beneath superficial cordiality. The shadow of Hinterkaifeck stretched far, poisoning relationships, transforming community into isolation. The farmhouse itself fell into disrepair, doors rotting, windows shattering. Yet its sinister reputation endured, deterring redevelopment. Villagers shunned it, avoiding even passing near, afraid of what lingered unseen within. Time passed, yet memories refused to fade. Decades later, descendants of villagers whispered still about Hinterkaifeck, warning their children away from the haunted ground. Researchers returned periodically, hoping modern methods might solve the enduring mystery. But Hinterkaifeck remained stubbornly silent, secrets firmly locked behind crumbling walls. And though generations had come and gone, no definitive answer emerged. Hinterkaifeck had become more than tragedy. It had become eternal uncertainty, a haunting reminder that evil sometimes remains unknowable, unstoppable, and unbearably close. But perhaps the greatest terror lay in realizing that, somewhere among them, a murderer once lived comfortably alongside neighbors, silently hiding in plain sight, watching them, knowing their routines, their vulnerabilities, their isolation. Because Hinterkaifeck taught a bitter, terrifying lesson, the killer wasn't necessarily a monster lurking beyond the village gates. Sometimes the real monsters walked quietly among friends, hidden by smiles, secrets, and silence. And as villagers locked their doors each night, they knew bitterly, fearfully, that they might never truly be safe again. Chapter 6. Trails of Terror. Horror rarely leaves without traces. It lingers, leaving clues behind, waiting patiently for those willing, or perhaps foolish enough, to follow them. The Hinterkaifeck murders left trails that led investigators deeper into confusion, each clue more unsettling, each path darker than the last. In the weeks following the gruesome discovery, police meticulously combed through every inch of the farmstead. Evidence lay scattered like broken pieces of a nightmare, each discovery amplifying the mystery rather than resolving it. The first, most chilling clue emerged within the attic. Investigators found signs that someone had indeed been living there, secretly, Straw mattresses flattened from prolonged use, discarded scraps of food, and footprints embedded deeply in the dusty wooden floorboards. Someone had watched, waited, and lived silently above the family, hiding in plain sight, unseen and unheard. Detectives felt a sickening chill realizing the family's fears had been tragically justified. Someone had indeed hidden within their home, observing their most private moments, patiently biding time until the perfect opportunity for violence. Yet the footprints themselves offered only confusion. Too large to be Joseph's or little Cazilia's, too distinct to belong to Victoria or Maria. They were measured meticulously, recorded carefully, yet no match emerged, deepening the investigators' frustration. Outside, another eerie discovery surfaced. Footprints in the snow, faintly preserved beneath layers of ice, traced directly toward the house, but inexplicably, no footprints led away. The killer had arrived unseen, yet never seemed to have departed, vanishing impossibly into the frigid night. Detectives puzzled obsessively over this impossibility. Could someone remain hidden so effectively after committing such horrific violence? Had they somehow vanished into thin air? Or was the killer still watching quietly, waiting for attention to dissipate before slipping away unseen? The trails led investigators outward, questioning neighbors, interrogating acquaintances, probing deeply into the family's personal lives. Each interview revealed unsettling whispers, suspicions hidden beneath polite smiles. Several neighbors spoke hesitantly of tensions within the Gruber household, dark family secrets, whispers of conflict, suspicions of incest involving Andreas and Victoria. Rumors spread quietly, staining the family's memory, complicating the investigation further. Investigators considered Victoria's past carefully. They uncovered whispers about her deceased husband, Carl Gabriel. Killed, they believed, in World War I, yet his body had never been found. Could he have returned secretly, enraged by betrayal or loss, exacting vengeance upon the family he once belonged to? But no evidence supported this theory conclusively. Carl Gabriel remained a spectral figure, haunting the case through absence, leaving more questions than answers. Another neighbor described strange visitors near the farm, a vagrant, a drifter, figures glimpsed fleetingly among the trees. One villager swore he'd seen a mysterious man lurking around Hinterkaifeck shortly before the murders. Someone whose face he couldn't recall clearly, who vanished suddenly when approached. Police pursued these vague leads desperately, yet each trail grew cold quickly, leaving them with nothing concrete. The killer remained frustratingly elusive, slipping silently between theories, vanishing just as easily as he'd appeared. Lorenz Schlittenbauer himself faced intensive scrutiny. His close ties to Victoria raised suspicion, intensified by his odd behavior upon discovering the bodies. He had calmly moved them without hesitation, showing surprising familiarity with the farm's interior. Interrogated repeatedly, Schlittenbauer vehemently denied involvement, pleading innocence, explaining his actions as shock-driven reactions. Eventually, lacking concrete evidence, police reluctantly cleared him. But suspicion shadowed Schlittenbauer throughout his life, casting permanent doubt over his innocence. Other unsettling clues emerged slowly. Doors locked mysteriously from the inside, suggesting the killer knew the layout intimately. Windows showed no forced entry, confirming suspicions that the murderer had comfortably resided within the household beforehand. The brutality itself puzzled investigators deeply. The attacks had been ruthless, almost personal, suggesting intense emotion or deep resentment. Yet nothing clarified who could harbor such animosity toward the family, unless hidden secrets remained undiscovered, buried alongside the victims. Detectives turned toward psychological explanations, consulting experts who suggested a killer driven by obsession or madness, someone who viewed the family as symbolic, figures in a distorted drama of personal torment. Despite Exhaustive searches, the murder weapon, the blood-stained mattock, remained untraceable. Authorities speculated the killer discarded it carefully, perhaps burying it deep within nearby woods, yet numerous searches yielded nothing. Weeks turned to months, investigators growing increasingly desperate. Authorities reached out nationally, publishing pleas for information, hoping widespread attention might bring new clues forward. Tips flooded in chaotically, reports of suspicious strangers, strange happenings miles away, but each lead dissolved rapidly under scrutiny, leaving only disappointment behind. Meanwhile, the farmhouse deteriorated slowly, silence reclaiming its spaces. Yet locals spoke nervously of strange occurrences continuing even after police departed. Lights flickered inexplicably within the abandoned house. Shadows moved subtly behind cracked windows. Whispers floated faintly through the empty rooms, audible to those brave enough or foolish enough to linger nearby. Villagers erected crosses around the farm perimeter, symbols meant to ward off evil spirits believed still lurking there. Yet even these precautions failed to dispel lingering dread, villagers avoiding the area fearfully, convinced something malevolent remained anchored firmly to Hinterkaifeck's blood-stained ground. Over time, official investigations slowed to a standstill, but private curiosity persisted. Amateur detectives and journalists periodically explored the property, drawn irresistibly by enduring mysteries. Occasionally, visitors claimed eerie experiences, doors slamming inexplicably, sudden drops in temperature, overwhelming sensations of being watched. Each visitor left shaken, convinced something sinister lingered still. Perhaps the killer's restless spirit, perhaps something darker, born from bloodshed and isolation. Yet, despite persistent fascination, no concrete answers surfaced. Hinterkaifeck stubbornly guarded its secrets, refusing to surrender truth easily. Eventually, authorities conceded defeat quietly, categorizing the murders as unsolved, relegating Hinterkaifeck to a grim footnote in criminal history. Files grew dusty on shelves, investigative fervor waned, but the community never fully recovered. Fear persisted stubbornly, whispers continued quietly, suspicion simmered unspoken beneath fragile calm. Generations passed, yet trails leading toward truth faded slowly into obscurity. Hinterkaifeck's horrors transformed from tragedy into folklore, whispered cautiously to children, warnings of isolation's dangers, reminders that darkness often dwells closest. Yet, within these whispers lingered the most chilling possibility. What if the killer had never truly left? What if, unnoticed, he lived comfortably among villagers afterward, smiling gently, attending church, quietly mocking their fear? Because Hinterkaifeck taught painful truths, evil doesn't always reveal itself clearly. Sometimes darkness wears familiar faces, walks silently among neighbors, leaves no trails behind except lingering dread and unanswered questions. Thus, the greatest terror became the possibility that the murderer, hidden behind a familiar smile, remained forever unknown, forever near, forever watching quietly from the shadows. Chapter 7. Shadows Unveiled. Years have a strange way of blurring memories, softening harsh realities into ghostly echoes of what once was. Yet for Hinterkaifeck, time only seemed to sharpen the edges of its chilling mysteries, carving deeper shadows into the heart of every unanswered question. Decades passed, and the brutal murders of 1922 became more legend than reality. Yet the darkness surrounding the farmstead never truly faded. Journalists, amateur investigators, and curious souls returned repeatedly, each hoping to unravel threads left tangled by official inquiries. But every new attempt revealed only deeper shadows, secrets still defiantly hidden beneath the surface. In the 1950s, an investigative journalist named Karl Meyer became obsessed with Hinterkaifeck. Determined and unrelenting, Carl sought out elderly villagers, last survivors of the generation who remembered the horror firsthand. Many refused him outright, eyes darkening at mere mention of the farm, superstitiously afraid to invite misfortune back into their lives. Yet others, voices trembling, shared unsettling recollections, reopening old wounds cautiously, hesitantly. Carl learned of previously unheard stories, late-night sightings of shadowy figures lurking near Hinterkaifeck long after it had been deserted. Several villagers whispered cautiously of hearing faint cries drifting from the farmhouse during moonless nights. Cries sounding disturbingly similar to a child sobbing. One elderly woman, trembling visibly, described a memory that haunted her still. A mysterious stranger who appeared briefly in the village months after the murders, asking unsettlingly specific questions about the Gruber family. His face remained vividly clear in her mind, calm, yet predatory, polite, yet unnerving. She swore he watched her carefully as she answered, as if measuring every word, calculating quietly. Carl pursued this lead vigorously, combing through historical records, archives, police reports. Yet every trail inevitably dissolved into confusion, the stranger disappearing as abruptly as he appeared, leaving no clear identity, no recognizable name, only lingering dread. Digging deeper, Carl uncovered disturbing reports previously overlooked or deliberately ignored by authorities. Several villagers had confessed secretly seeing Victoria argue violently with a mysterious figure shortly before the murders, someone tall, imposing, yet faceless in memory. Had she known her killer intimately? Was this confrontation evidence of deeper personal conflicts leading directly toward violence? Carl's efforts rekindled public interest dramatically. New theories proliferated: jealous lovers, disgruntled workers, familial vendettas, each scenario examined meticulously, yet each unraveling frustratingly when confronted by logic or evidence. In the 1970s, criminal psychologists revisited Hinterkaifeck, drawn by the enigmatic brutality displayed. Profiling suggested a deeply disturbed, yet highly intelligent perpetrator, someone intimate with family routines, emotionally invested, harboring obsessive grudges. This renewed scrutiny turned attention toward Victoria's rumored affairs, especially her complicated relationship with Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Suspicion returned sharply to Schlittenbauer, even decades after his death, prompting descendants to defend his memory passionately, disputing allegations vigorously. Yet suspicion clung stubbornly. Relatives recalled his lifelong obsession with Hinterkaifeck, his habit of revisiting the crime scene frequently in years afterward, wandering silently, consumed by inner turmoil. Could guilt have driven these restless returns? Or had he simply been tormented by grief and unresolved horror? Other theories surfaced intriguingly. Suggestions of supernatural elements, ancient curses binding the family to dark fates. Psychics, visited periodically, claiming to sense malevolent presences lingering persistently. Tales proliferated, recounting sightings of ghostly figures wandering silently through abandoned rooms, footsteps echoing faintly through empty halls. Skeptics scoffed openly at such notions, dismissing supernatural claims outright. Yet even the most skeptical struggled to explain eerie phenomena experienced firsthand: unexplained cold spots, sudden overwhelming dread, sounds inexplicable by rational explanations alone. By the late 20th century, Hinterkaifeck had solidified firmly into folklore, becoming synonymous with unresolved horror, a haunting emblem of evil's power to remain hidden indefinitely. Yet investigators refused surrender entirely, periodically reopening cases, applying modern forensic technology, hoping desperately to uncover overlooked evidence. In 1999, forensic teams re-examined preserved evidence meticulously, employing DNA analysis unavailable decades earlier. Yet disappointingly, results proved inconclusive. Samples degraded significantly, providing no clear suspect identification. Yet, curiously, modern investigations revealed previously unnoticed details. A diary entry from Victoria, hidden carefully beneath floorboards, cryptically referencing fears of being watched constantly, describing vividly chilling dreams of faceless visitors lurking silently near her bed. Had paranoia merely claimed her sanity gradually, or had genuine threats shadowed her secretly long before violence erupted brutally? These new revelations deepened confusion further, complicating theories rather than clarifying mysteries. Hinterkaifeck stubbornly refused easy solutions, each fresh discovery adding layers rather than removing them. Documentaries revisited Hinterkaifeck periodically, recounting chilling stories dramatically for captivated audiences worldwide, turning tragedy into entertainment, horror into curiosity. Yet beneath sensationalism lay genuine pain, genuine horror endured silently by generations, haunted relentlessly by unanswered questions. Villagers living nearby continued avoiding Hinterkaifeck superstitiously, insisting inexplicable happenings persisted. Reports emerged periodically, visitors describing overwhelming sensations of dread, fleeing abruptly after encountering inexplicable phenomena. Each account reinforced enduring beliefs that something evil remained firmly entrenched within Hinterkaifeck's boundaries. Yet the true identity of the killer remained frustratingly elusive, fading into obscurity despite relentless searches. Officially, the case remained open, an enduring mystery without resolution, leaving generations burdened by fear's lingering shadow, forever trapped by unanswered questions. Karl Mayr, near the end of his life, spoke candidly about Hinterkaifeck's enduring power. The farmstead, he explained solemnly, doesn't merely represent an unsolved murder. It symbolizes something darker, something deeply unsettling about humanity itself. It reminds us that sometimes horror remains hidden, not because we can't find it, but because perhaps we fear the truth too deeply to confront it directly. And thus, Hinterkaifeck endured, not merely as a murder mystery, but as haunting reflection upon humanity's hidden darkness, our quiet capacity for cruelty, our profound isolation amidst even closest bonds. Visitors today still venture cautiously toward Hinterkaifeck's crumbling ruins, cameras held nervously, breath shallow, hoping or, perhaps fearing, to glimpse lingering traces of unresolved horror. And perhaps as shadows lengthen slowly, they feel briefly the killer's eyes upon them, watching silently from darkness, forever concealed, forever near, forever mocking human attempts to comprehend evil clearly. For Hinterkaifeck's true horror lay precisely in mystery's persistence, reminding visitors uncomfortably that sometimes evil remains unknowable, unsolvable, uncomfortably close. And within that realization lay Hinterkaifeck's darkest truth, that perhaps humanity's greatest terror lies precisely in secrets we choose never fully to uncover, shadows we allow willingly to remain unveiled. Chapter 8. The Endless Haunting. Some stories refuse to fade. Instead, they linger, drifting quietly through generations, whispering endlessly into ears willing or unwilling to hear them. Hinterkaifeck became exactly that kind of story, a real horror forever etched deeply into history, unresolved, unfinished, forever haunting. As years became decades, the village surrounding Hinterkaifeck slowly changed. Roads improved, buildings rose and fell, new faces replaced familiar ones. Yet beneath these transformations, an unsettling constancy remained, the farmstead itself. Abandoned yet untouched, decaying yet stubbornly standing, it silently bore witness, holding tight to secrets no investigation could unravel. By the early 21st century, technology had advanced dramatically, yet even sophisticated forensics and DNA testing yielded only frustration. Hinterkaifeck remained stubbornly silent, its mysteries wrapped carefully within layers of time, secrecy, and darkness. Yet fascination persisted undiminished. Online forums buzzed with theories, debates heatedly about the case's intricacies, dissecting every clue obsessively, yet each discussion inevitably arrived at the same frustrating conclusion. Hinterkaifeck's horror might forever remain unanswered. The farmhouse itself became an eerie pilgrimage site, drawing visitors worldwide. Curiosity seekers, true crime enthusiasts, paranormal investigators, all ventured cautiously toward Hinterkaifeck's crumbling remains, hoping either to satisfy curiosity or to glimpse echoes of past horrors firsthand. Some visitors spoke afterward about unsettling experiences. Cameras mysteriously malfunctioned near the farmhouse, devices drained inexplicably. Others described overwhelming sensations of dread, nausea, disorientation upon stepping within Hinterkaifeck's boundaries. Skeptics dismissed these accounts as imagination's power, but even they couldn't deny the oppressive atmosphere surrounding Hinterkaifeck, a weight felt palpably even by hardened doubters. Yet for local villagers, Hinterkaifeck represented something darker, a constant reminder that evil lingered close, unresolved, haunting their communal consciousness. Older generations warned younger ones away firmly, recounting vividly the brutal murders and enduring mystery. In 2007, descendants of the Gruber family held a private memorial near Hinterkaifeck. Tearfully, quietly, they honored ancestors tragically lost, expressing publicly their desire for closure, even knowing resolution remained improbable. Media coverage renewed interest briefly, but soon faded, leaving grief and unanswered questions lingering stubbornly behind. Investigators occasionally revisited the case, hoping newer technology might finally yield answers. Yet disappointment became routine. Hinterkaifeck stubbornly refused resolution, its secrets buried firmly alongside victims themselves. Psychologists speculated openly about collective trauma endured by villagers surrounding Hinterkaifeck. They described community-wide paranoia, suspicion deeply embedded, mistrust ingrained permanently into local culture. A legacy of fear passed silently from generation to generation. The farmstead itself deteriorated gradually, structures collapsing, silently beneath weight of years and neglect. Yet villagers refused even contemplating redevelopment, convinced evil had permanently tainted the ground, forever marking it cursed territory. Despite official warnings, adventurous youths periodically explored Hinterkaifeck bravely or foolishly, testing courage against darkness. Some fled hurriedly afterward, terrified, recounting harrowing experiences. Footsteps echoing inexplicably behind them, faint cries floating through abandoned halls, shadowy figures glimpsed fleetingly at edges of vision, ghost hunting groups investigated occasionally, capturing ambiguous images, strange orbs floating silently, shadowy shapes moving subtly through darkness. Each encounter deepened fascination, yet resolved nothing definitively. Historians documented Hinterkaifeck extensively, analyzing sociocultural contexts carefully, exploring psychological theories thoroughly. Yet academically rigorous approaches yielded no clearer resolution than sensational speculations. Hinterkaifeck remained frustratingly ambiguous, defying categorization neatly. By the 100th anniversary of murders, media revisited Hinterkaifeck widely, retelling horrors dramatically for new generations unfamiliar with tragedy's original impact. Documentaries explored meticulously every facet: family backgrounds, societal contexts, investigative efforts historically. Yet beneath factual recountings lay lingering unease, a quiet acknowledgement that true understanding remained perpetually elusive. A century later, Hinterkaifeck's horror had become mythologized deeply, transformed entirely from real tragedy into symbolic narrative. Yet beneath mythology lingered genuine pain, actual violence, real victims whose lives ended brutally, whose murderer remained eternally unknown. Descendants, weary yet resigned, spoke openly about emotional burdens carried silently, generation after generation, haunted relentlessly by unresolved tragedy. Hinterkaifeck remained tragically unfinished business. Legacy passed inevitably onward, forever shadowed by darkness unresolved. Occasionally, descendants dreamed vividly of murdered ancestors, appearing silently, expressionless, pointing wordlessly toward shadows concealing hidden truths. Each awakening reinforced painful reality that clarity might remain forever unattainable. Theories persisted stubbornly. Personal vendettas, secret lovers, drifters, supernatural forces, yet each explanation dissolved inevitably into contradictions unresolved. Hinterkaifeck refused fitting neatly into logical frameworks, resisting categorization stubbornly, insisting instead upon remaining unresolved horror perpetually. Visitors standing today among crumbling ruins experience palpable dread, overwhelming sensations that evil continues lingering stubbornly, darkness entrenched firmly into soil itself, forever staining land where bloodshed occurred tragically decades earlier. Hinterkaifeck thus endures eternally, not merely historical curiosity, but living reminder painfully that evil persists silently, quietly, hidden sometimes beneath familiarity, comforting falsely. It reminds humanity uncomfortably that sometimes darkness dwells unrecognized nearby, friends, neighbors, acquaintances carrying hidden horrors silently within hearts unseen. Ultimately, Hinterkaifeck's greatest lesson emerges chillingly clear. True, horror lies precisely in humanity's capacity for violence, hidden silently beneath facades, comforting superficially. Its terror endures because murderer vanished quietly afterward, slipping seamlessly among others, becoming indistinguishable entirely, hidden perpetually behind smiles, deceptive. Thus, Hinterkaifeck haunts permanently, not merely place, but communal. Consciousness itself, reminding eternally that isolation breeds darkness dangerously, secrecy nurtures violence quietly. Evil persists silently beneath everyday interactions, ordinary. A century onward, Hinterkaifeck's shadows stretch endlessly outward, enveloping subsequent generations, firmly within mystery unresolved, darkness enduring, horror forever haunting, an endless legacy perpetually unresolved, eternally reminding humanity uncomfortably that true terror persists quietly, hidden silently among us, forever near yet frustratingly beyond comprehension entirely. Forever unresolved, forever haunting,